Welcome to the M&A Diaries. On this episode, I sit down with Nikki and Nigel Adams, co-managing directors of Valorem. I talk to them all things about the life of an independent firm in the context of today's environment with all the acquisition activity that's going on with private equity in the market. We discuss the opportunities that arise from current conditions, as well as the challenges that independent firms may face.
So I really wanted to get you guys on an episode with us and have a conversation around what's going on a wider point of view in terms of acquisition activity, but what are the opportunities for independent firms like yourself in the current market, but also what are the potential downsides as well, and I pick those certain topics. So to kick off, I guess it would be good to get an idea of what your general thoughts are and ponderings of the environment at the moment, and what you see as your benefits to this and maybe opportunities.
Yeah, sure. Obviously, the big subject matter at the moment is private equity, and it has been for 2 or 3 years, really. I think it's a really interesting introduction. I think our industry needs disruption. We saw it 2012, 2013 with cloud. We saw it when KPMG and the bigger guys sort of looked more seriously at the smaller market. And although the latter didn't really work for them, I think what it actually did was make a lot of practice owners sit up and think, actually, we need to do something a bit different.
Absolutely.
And I think we're seeing a similar impact now with private equity. I mean, we've been big flag bearers of saying, we're a business, we're not a practice. It needs to be scalable. All those the old way of doing things needs to be reinvented. And I think that's very much polarized private equity's involvement, because, we've got to bear in mind, they're not in this for a happiness factory. They're in here. Mm-hmm. They're going to be looking to spin. They're looking at profit. And I think, strangely for a business, I think accountancy practice has always sort of veered away from the profit thing, which is obviously quite a strange thing. It's the thing you don't talk about. So, I think for me, I think it's a really exciting time. I think it's a really challenging time. I think that any rate of change, and the rate of change here is quite quick. I mean, is very quick. And we've got getting so much thrown at us. It's not really accountancy anymore. It used to be, we'd be looking at regulatory changes, and we've got regulatory changes, but on top of that, we've got tech. We've got people entering the industry, as I say, private equity, private investment, and all these things cause quite an unsettling environment, which as accountants, we don't like that. I don't know what your thoughts are, Nick, on it.
Well, I think for me, the big thing, it seems, as you say, it's causing extremes. So I think looking at the firms that we've bought and that we've looked at have been struggling with talent acquisition and have been struggling with adoption of cloud, let alone AI. Mm-hmm. So I think, and obviously the practices that we've bought have been for maybe a particular service line, or we bought a cloud-based one. But again, it's a challenge because were their cloud the same as our cloud? So I think for me, I've seen is that I think it's going to be harder for the firms that are sub 1 million. I think the sub 1 million are going to be a more challenged than ever before, because then they've got people coming, working from their bedrooms, that we've got no overheads, that are just, working very lean, using technology. So they're not needing so much manpower. But I think the next few years, I think there is a massive opportunity with those firms that are looking for another home, that maybe are too small for private equity, but have still got good number twos that maybe can't afford to buy in. And that's the sort of practices we've been looking for. So I think we can thank private equity for that, because I think that actually what's happening is that people are being much more geared towards profitability, as Nigel said. It's been difficult to put prices up because of COVID, and obviously, particularly at the lower end of the market, that's meant that, again, the firms that have perhaps not, struggled because they've had to, they've been hit with talent being taken away by bigger firms. They've been hit with getting themselves through COVID in the first place. Then clients, obviously, we've seen a lot of business closure, not liquidation, but just generally, our age group probably just saying, actually, we've had enough. So I think there's a lot of challenges.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, the private equity coming to the market, I think, has highlighted some of those challenges, and you've alluded to a few there between you both. But actually, there is that part of the market that private equity isn't necessarily talking to right now, and where independents like yourself can talk to them and still give the benefits and relieve those tensions or those challenging points. Talent certainly is one of the major issues, where some of the smaller independent firms are really struggling to keep hold of their good talent. They're being allured by maybe larger salaries or better prospects at another firm. Succession is one of the key issues that's making everyone look, externally right now for the succession, because, younger individuals are either struggling to get their hands on capital to buy in, or generally do not have the ambition to step up into equity and run a business. They're quite happy looking after their clients, and that's all they wish to do. And then you mentioned obviously the compliance side. Certainly that smaller end, sub 1 million, the practitioners are wearing all sorts of different hats at the moment, whether it be marketing, HR, compliance, and the regulatory side comes up, and they haven't got that infrastructure around them. So a lot of private equity at the larger end are saying, well, we can alleviate some of that heavy lifting, but they're still not going to talk to the sub 1 million firms or even sub 2 million firms in the wider scheme. So they need to go somewhere where that infrastructure is going to be there to release that heavy lifting from them day to day, which is why they're looking to move, as well as technology. And we'll unpick the technology pile later on as well.
Yeah, I sorry, Nikki.
You go.
Okay. Husband and wife spat. That's fine. We do that all the time. Good chemistry. No, I think you're right. As I say, I think the private equity thing, it's beginning to mature a bit. I think to start with, there are a lot of people coming in, and James, I'm sure you saw this, a lot of private equity coming in saying, we like the stickiness of accountancy. It sort of is a sort of subscription-based model where, we can get that recurring revenue. I think the issue that private equity had was they didn't really understand the quirks that come with an accountancy practice and accountancy practitioners. And I think that mindset, there was certainly a conflict, I think, between what private equity perceived to be their business model and what an accountancy practice, and even the bigger ones, let alone the smaller ones, but the bigger ones, obviously there was some quite high profile acquisitions that didn't go as well as they should have done. And I think it's an understanding of that market. And as I say, that will mature. I think, touching on the pricing, I think some of the stuff that's been really interesting is that we have seen pricing generally, private equity will increase prices. They're a lot more bullish. As accountants,
absolutely.
As an accountant, we a lot of us worry about putting the prices up. And we've got all sorts of matrix to, whether it's go propose or models there that will help us so we can say our computer says no. But there's still a resistance. There's still a granular approach that many accountants take, which in itself leads to, the traditional critical mass of an accountancy practice, whether that's 500,000 per partner or $1 million per partner. And I find it quite interesting that we're still using that as a metric for, because it shouldn't be anymore. And as we mentioned earlier about disruptive, we're going to talk about tech a bit later, but cloud technology started to say, well, actually, hang on, guys, you can make this scalable. And compliance is cool. And I think a lot of people turn around and sort of, they turn their nose up at compliance, but compliance is the foundation of what you're doing. It's good, regular income. Okay, it's not sexy. It's
the bread and butter.
Of course it is. Absolutely right. Yeah. And it amazes me. That you've got people, saying, well, I don't think they say advisory is the future quite so much anymore, but that used to be the buzzword. But all you're actually becoming in an advisory is basically a glorified employee, unless you can scale, unless you can actually integrate it within the business, which a lot of accountants won't do. As Nikki mentioned about the talent being a problem, that in itself is a barrier. So when we're looking to acquire, one of the key things for us, obviously, the first thing is, and I'm sure Nikki is very much more Nikki's area than me, is staff. But then we'll actually look at the type of work that's being done. And if it's heavy in compliance work, that's quite a big tick for us, because, those relationships tend to rest with the team coming through. Whereas advisory tends to rest with a partner. Advisory at the highest level is quite a personal thing.
I think the other big difference, I think, is marketing and just the amount of spend that you probably need to have now to market yourself. I would say probably now you're marketing yourself not just for, probably not as much for clients as you are for talent in, coming to your practice. So I think it's very difficult, as I say, I think the requirements now for what you need to do to be a successful practice has just pushed the bar up so much higher that I think that it's very, I think it is very, very difficult to do that if you're a sub-million practice. I just, I think it's, we talked about this the other day, didn't we, Nigel? Saying if we were setting up again now, it's actually a lot harder, I think, to punch through, because the way we did it years ago, I just don't know if it's as easy as that now in terms of, getting finance for acquisitions and things like that. So certainly
I think on the finance side, we're certainly seeing it's become a lot more tougher now, or certainly more expensive. If you haven't got assets to be able to lend on the back of or use as some sort of security, and it's a cash flow lend, you're looking at tremendous arrangement fees, let alone the interest rates on that as well. So it's going to become a lot tougher for that. And likewise, a lot of the firms that probably would come up for sale, the sub 1 million mark, and it leads nicely onto the next point about the opportunities for yourselves or independents as well. They're probably firms that are stuck in the 1980s, so to speak, and need a lot of movement coming forward. So the profit margin levels are really, really low, and probably a lot of the relationships are very much held with the proprietor of that practice. So to really, yes, there's big gains to be made, but to be able to get the lending off the back of that on the financial reporting as it is now is pretty tough, right? The banks aren't really going to look to support you potentially on that. So yeah, it'd be great to kind of get your thoughts on that as well, and the challenges around it, but also what are the real opportunities that you're looking forward to as an independent firm that's looking to grow, looking to acquire, what is out there, and where you see the wins are for you as a business going forward, but also those that will be involved in the business for the next chapter as well, so the next generation as well included.
Well, I think for me, looking at our business plan, it's really looking at spreading the net for talent. So it's not necessarily, because I think clients come with it. We've got a sales team, so we're not as bothered as some practices might be about getting new clients, because actually, we've got a fully functioning sales and marketing part to the business. So it's more for me about widening the net for locations. But I think whereas before you might struggle managing locations, I think with technology now, that's making it a lot easier. So I think for us, it's more about saying, well, if we've got a good, because we've got specialisms, we've got audit and we've got R&D, we want to be able to have other locations where they can go. So, so I think for me, that's the big thing is looking. I think you're always going to need local presence, but that might be, whereas it might have been half an hour between offices, it's probably now an hour between offices, because then you can people can work remotely, and as long as you've got a hub they can go to. It's
interesting how that's changed, isn't it? During COVID, everyone retreated and said, no, we're going to be working remotely. And I think it was, a year or so after COVID, everyone started, actually, we do need that presence. Let's start looking for office space. Again, so that's an interesting point.
I was talking to an office designer, and he was saying, I think the office space will change. What it be less desks needed and more collaboration spaces, and that feeling of being in a club, so that you're getting your social, some social interaction and from your office space. So it will be sort of, I think, changing over the next few years. But again, that's investment. And, I just wonder how much PE companies will buy into that, and how many will buy into that, and how many will be bootstrapping and saying we want to keep the cost down. We're not going to be spending money on those kind of things. I don't know the answer to this, but that's my thinking, is that, I think that more and more it's going to be about, at the end of the day, nothing has changed from, 50, 60 years ago in terms of you've got to have fee producing people, good technical expertise. But obviously with AI coming in, it may mean that one person has a much, much bigger portfolio.
Yes.
So it's still always going to be down to your fee producers and your good people with clients and your processes and your systems and how you market yourself. So that doesn't change, does it?
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think that the move towards a much more process-driven practice it's quite exciting, and I think a lot of the newer practices are a lot more focused on as much the internal runnings of the business as they are with the client work. I think that's a good thing. I think that, as Nikki said there, the issue that you do get, I mean, as I say, one of the issues you get with private equity, I mean, there's good and there's bad with everything. I think what it has done, first of all, it's actually made people stand up and think, am I done? Let's face it, we're largely an aging profession. There's not enough people coming into practice. We have to make it sexier so that people will come in, because what we do is fantastic. I mean, how many jobs can you have where you're speaking to 4 different types of business with different types of issues in a day? I mean, it's, for me, being the consummate butterfly and get bored really easy, how can you possibly get bored with that? And I don't think we make enough of that. And I think that one of the things we've certainly seen as well, and it's difficult for smaller practices, the constant thing whenever you're talking to smaller practices, and we've got a few cohorts where we work with smaller practices, and it's a two-way thing. The great thing about being small is that you're a lot more flexible, that you can do things a lot quicker. Whereas as you
Absolutely.
get bigger, you get bogged down in the inevitable bureaucracy of being in a bigger business. So there's a two-way thing there we have. But one of the key problems they have is, so everybody talks about talent, and the problem with that is we find quite interestingly that talent is not, everybody says, it's about people getting big money. To be honest with you, that is obviously a factor. And if someone is motivated by money, they're going to go where the money is. But the majority of accountants, if you're going to do that, you're going to go into industry. Let's be perfectly honest, there's a lot more money in industry than there is in what we do. So I think it's about creating an environment which is open, which is collaborative, and where somebody joining can see a pathway, how they can grow within the business. And it's not just rhetoric, this is how you do it. And it's a thing I've noticed with some of the interviews that I've been on, I don't do so much of the interviewing these days, it's very much Nikki's area, but is people at 17 and 18 are quite keen to see how they can grow within the business. And if you can't give them that answer, they're either not going to be with you very long or they won't come to you at all. And I think that is a problem with a smaller practice, because it's a little bit dead man's shoes. Even with some of the cloud practices now, you have to be able to have a vision that is to say, well, this is where we're going to take it. Now, you're always going to get some people that are quite happy to just be, and everybody needs these people that are just happy to come into work, do their job well, and go home. And you don't want a whole team of ambitious people, otherwise it will be a car crash.
No, precisely. Yeah,
but
you can't have all strikers on the pitch.
Exactly right. Right. Yeah. But I think that is a challenge for smaller practices. We've touched on the fear of technology, and I'll probably talk about that a bit later. I think that we are radically in a tech space, and I have to say, if I was on my own now, I'd be, to be honest with you, I probably wouldn't be doing this anymore, because I don't, I'm of an age where I sort of get the outputs from technology, but I do glaze over pretty quickly. Fortunately, I've got some amazing guys here that really get it and sort of roll their eyes a little bit when I say something, and they say, clearly you've got no idea what you're talking about, but we think we know where you're going with it, And I think there's a need for that. I think that, where a lot of private equity, there's a suggestion. I was at a conference actually earlier in the year, which was really interesting. And there were some people that had been bought by private equity, and they were saying, look, we've suddenly got all this money. And so, have you really got all this money? Well, what are you going to do with it? And it's, don't know, So I think that technology is not necessarily, innovation is not necessarily going to be driven by private equity because of the costs involved in it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think what it has done, though, is highlighted the area and made other people stand up and go, right, we do definitely need to go on that path. It's kind of not shot the starter's gun, but has definitely added a lot more momentum to that conversation, I think.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And I think, Nigel, what you were saying there about as long as you're staying in your lane right now, because there's going to be a need for the private equity, there's going to be a need for, independents like yourselves, and there's going to be a need for those smaller firms to stay around, for a while, but they're going to have to make a decision soon for all of the factors that we've already alluded to there. And just to zoom back, I guess, in terms of acquisition opportunities for, independent firms that are in your position, we've got the baby boomer generation, or I did hear someone refer to it as the silver tsunami the other day as well, which is a new phrase for me.
I wish
the silver
it's there
tsunami
somewhere.
but they're all now looking around them, looking at their retirement. So there's going to be a whole awash of sub 2 million, sub 1 million firms who have no succession and have no way out. So they're going to be looking for people like yourselves to acquire them. So from that perspective, you must be pretty excited about what the pathway is for the next 2 or 3 years and what the growth potential is for Valorem as well.
Yeah, we've made no secret of where we want to go, and I think the reason for that is going back to the type of businesses that we're dealing with. When you're in the SME market, really the only way you can innovate is to have a lot of clients, and so that you're not pushing your prices up too much. You're just taking some of that, small part of that profit and turning it back into innovation, or additional services. So, I think we're very clear on what we'd like to achieve. But I think that you can't get away from the fact that it still comes down to the people in the end. When you're looking at any kind of acquisition, it really does come down to having a succession, some kind of succession there. So, I think if we were looking perhaps practices we might have looked at 10 years ago, where there was no succession, it wouldn't have worried us so much. But I think now, we would be saying, well, actually, is there another layer to that business? Because if there isn't, it's very, very difficult. The price would be very low. And I think that's the shocker to some people when they're, I think they years ago.
And when you say succession, Nikki,
well, I think if you look at the ones that we've done in over the last sort of 5-6 years, it's been because of the people in that practice. It's not necessarily, or it's what the service that they can give us. So we did one that was probably the most traditional, which was specifically for audit. So we looked at that and we said, well, we will take. It's got a lovely client bank, very different. It's enabled us to push forward strategically. And we're now able to work with bigger businesses because we can offer the audit service as well. We can offer audit to other smaller firms. So it's given us more to offer our partners that we already have. So I think it's more this, I think going back to the old partnership model, it was always based on the fact that the partners would take the profit share while they were in the seat, and then they would pay that forward. So they would be bringing on succession and then pay that forward. And then the next generation would come through. And I think the trouble is at the moment, there isn't that generation coming through. So when we're looking at practice now, we really want to see if there's a number 2 there that maybe might have, a few years ago might have become a partner, but can't afford to buy in. And that's the exciting thing for me, because I think there's a lot of people in that position. We've got people in our company who, would not have been able to afford to buy in. So if we can come up with a model where they still are shareholders or have some kind of skin in the game, then that replaces the old partnership model to me, but it becomes based on proper business rather than that's not to say partnerships aren't, but I know going back to that conference, Nigel, it was very much, there was a big debate about what's the difference between a partnership model and a PE backed model. And I think there's pros and cons for both.
There are pros and cons of both. I mean, and I think one of the harsh realities, James, is is sort of when I'm talking to people of my age. I'm one of your silver tsunamis, maybe. I'm not sure I've got quite that energy, but there you go.
I'm keeping you working.
But I think the problem is that there's always been and I'm sure you probably get it as well, there's always been I'm going to get 1.2 times fees. And I think now that's not really Yeah, I mean, it's still people talk about it, but the reality is, I mean, certainly from us, we're actually looking at a business and saying, well, yeah, but have we got an underlying profit here? If this is all if all the relationships sit with one person, and then that person does no delegation at all, then why would we buy that?
That's been one of the biggest shifts in the last 6 months, or even 6 to 12 months, is that move from fees related valuation or multiple to the underlying profit, which, let's face it, in every other sector,
yeah, exactly,
it would be a multiple of EBITDA or profitability in some way or form.
Yeah, and I think as well, there's people getting seduced, not by you guys, I hasten to add. I'm not just saying that because we're talking, but there's people being seduced by figures of 1.2, 1.3 times, which, for a sub-million practice, you're not going to get. And I think the problem is you can be seduced by that, and you can put any purchase agreement together, includes that, but the clawback is huge. So the reality is it will always come back to, 70, 80p, maybe, if you wanted to do it in translation, unless you've got something unique. And, as I say, I think we're starting to see some of the cloud practices come onto the market. And cloud practices typically were set up with a view to being quite light touch. And I think at the smaller micro area, it's about having the ability to be able to pick up and then add using technology. And so I think, we as we bought a cloud practice 18 months ago now. And it was a very different approach we took to the practice we bought previously, which, as Nikki said, was a lot more traditional. And it was quite an interesting conversation there, because the partners, one of the partners stayed, and he's our audit director here. Two of the partners left, or have now left, and they got full payout, I hasten to add, which is great because it delivered. But we said, why did you pick us? Because, to be perfectly honest, we came out of the meeting thinking, well, that was fun, but we're sort of poles apart.
They'll never pick us.
They'll never pick us. And they just turned around and said, well, you guys are the future.
Yep.
And, they'd had issues with retaining staff. They'd had issues with client pricing. And I think there has to be a sea change. I think, in answer to your question, a long answer to a short question, it is very exciting. I think there are a lot of opportunities for us to grow and develop. I think there's a lot of opportunities for practices that perhaps at a point in their development where they've either got to invest very heavily or join up with somebody else who's perhaps done that bit of investment that's not private equity. And I think sub-million, you're not going to get a lot of private.
And I think it's that dynamic that you see a lot in the partnership model, where the younger partners, beforehand it was, three guys and girls would set up together, and then they'll go through their entire career, and then they'll retire together or sell it on to the next generation. Now that age profile is a lot vastly spread now. So what we are seeing a lot is, quite rightly, to a certain degree, the older partners, they have a nice income every year coming in through the profits of the business, whereas the younger partners realize they're going to get left behind for, with technology, talent, whatever it may well be. So then all of a sudden you've got this bashing of heads where the older partners going, well, look, I've got 2 years left. Let me get as much income as I can in, where the younger partners want to do that reinvestment that you alluded to there, Nigel. So that's obviously the answer there is, well, let's look outside and externally, who's out there that we could merge with and partner with. And there was a key point as you was talking there with Nigel as well, about the clawback scenario. Yes, I have those conversations where potential sellers will come to me and they've been quoted 1.3, 1.4, and it's my job to bring their expectations back down to reality, which is a hard conversation to have when they've got a figure in their mind. But equally, just as much, 9 times out of 10, those high valuations that are thrown out there, all right, they're not legitimate as such, but they're probably with firms that have no synergy with you, no cultural alignment. So you're always going to get the clawbacks from there. So you'd rather take a lower multiple or a more realistic multiple and work with someone that's culturally aligned, because you're going to avoid those clawbacks, because you're actually working with people that are joined up thinking, are on the same path as you, and your interests are aligned correctly.
Yeah, I think from our point of view, we've always wanted to make a full payout. And I think that's really important, to go in with that mindset, because for both parties, you really want it to work. But I think from some of the things that I've heard in the marketplace, I think people are getting good offers, but they're not actually as they go through the due diligence process, that's not what they're going to get at the end. So, so I think that's you could be off. I always think the heads of terms are really, easy to put together, aren't they? Because you can make them what you want, but is that what you will end up with at the end? And I think that's sort of a word of caution really to anybody that gets a fantastic
and you
offer.
need to prepare for it. You're right,
you
Nick.
still got to go through quite an arduous due diligence process, because I think that's the other thing that I've learned over the years really is what's that process going to look like and how ready are you for it? Because you've got to keep your business going and you've got to get yourself through a due diligence process. And certainly the firms that we've purchased have found that very, very challenging because they're so hands-on that trying to do all of those things and answer all our questions, we've actually ended up putting people on site to help, which
it's a huge distraction.
No, it is.
Huge distraction.
Yeah.
So we've tried to do it that way and say, well, we'll put somebody on site. We'll do the digging ourselves and, try and do, which is probably, costs us a little bit, but it helps us learn about them actually a bit better as well, because we're talking to their team before the deal's done, which I know is not always the norm. But that seems to work very well for us. And it's come from really the first deal we ever did, where we didn't have much interaction with the team before. And it did, we found out there were quite a few issues there just between team members. So I think it's quite useful to have that. But my word of caution is, you can be offered what you like, but will you actually get that in the end?
Yeah. So we've talked about people and cultural alignment a lot during this conversation, and I think we're all in agreement that we're in a people business in the accountancy practice space. So, a lot of people do concentrate on the black and white, but that number one's you have to have the right people. You need to be working with the right people to make it work from short to mid-term to long term. So in terms of, again, concentrating on the independent market, we've spoke about earlier on some people being allured by larger wages, salaries potentially. And I think we are seeing a shift back now where people may have gone to the highest bidder over the last few months, but actually realizing this is not my forever home. They're getting a pound of flesh for the money they're paying me. So let me revert back to a firm that I feel like I could be there long term, and exactly that, have a career pathway that's clear to me, obtainable and achievable as long as I apply myself as well. So how do you guys go about attracting the right talent and retaining the right talent, and I guess looking forward, incentivizing them to be with you on the journey to hopefully one day be at the top table, I guess?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think we've had our challenges like everybody, I think, in terms of that. I think, people you think are going to be with you forever don't stay with you. And, I think from that, being in the mid-market, we've been challenged from people going to smaller businesses, people going to industry, people not perhaps wanting to, follow the route that we want to. I think you have to accept, particularly when, we've got quite a young demographic in the business, that people will need to go, will change. So I think for me, it's making it a really great place to be for whatever length of time they want to be with us, because I think, we're clear where we're going. So it's just a question of who wants to go on that journey. Now, the people that have been with us for years and years, it's a really tricky one to know what that common denominator is. But I think we try and just be open as much as we can be. We try and make it exciting as much as we can. We try and make it a lovely place to be. And I go back to my point earlier about marketing. We've poured a lot of money into marketing ourselves, and you say about us people, being a known name. So that takes a lot of time and energy. But it's paid off in the long run. And, we've got people that have started training with us that have come up through the ranks, and hopefully we'll have some good announcements to make soon on that front. And, I think because we've always been very clear where we want to go, I think that really helps. Probably the last 7-8 years in particular, when we sort of hooked up, decided, Xero was one of our big strategic partners. We decided that was the route we wanted to go down on the cloud side. And obviously the acquisition front means that we're always evolving. And I think for anybody starting in there, or wherever you are really in your journey, I think you want to feel that you know where the company's going. And, so we've always been very clear with that. And I think certainly from people I've interviewed lately, I think there is a feeling, I think, of COVID has changed things for people quite dramatically. I think what people, so I think we've seen that. We've had some people that have left that we didn't want to lose, that we haven't expected to lose. But I think realistically, people's lives change, don't they? And
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think the big thing that I'm seeing positively is that the institutions have woken up to this. And we've been working with the ACCA in particular, Nigel, haven't you, on how we can make it and, show what a great career it is to have. Because overall, it's just, we're all feeling the effects of a lack of talent just coming in, right from the beginning.
I think you're right. I mean, a business is a living thing, isn't it? And I think, and it's going to evolve. And unfortunately, sometimes, you outgrow people and people outgrow you. I mean, it goes both ways. And so I think you have to adopt that sort of perhaps more pragmatic approach and just make it the best environment it can be for the period that people are with you. But I think you also, and it's something that accountants aren't very good at, which is, again, one of the big things with me about having specialists doing specialist work and coming right back to what we were talking about at the start. It's a business approach. I haven't met any accountants that are truly great HR people. It's just not in our psyche, to be honest. And it's same as sales and marketing. I mean, obviously when you set a business up, you wear all the hats. But I think if you're going to grow and develop, you have to recognize other professionals and their skill sets and the fact that that's not your thing. You might like doing it, but it's, that's not your thing. And I've had to grow up with that. And, I love going out and
selling. I worked it out once, being the sad act that I am. I worked it out one weekend.
I couldn't possibly get away with that comment.
I sat and worked out once how many professions we have to have some knowledge of to do what we do. And it was about 30. It was like 30 other, other proper professions with institutes that we have to have some kind of knowledge of, being a general practitioner.
But it's so true, isn't it? Yeah. In any other sector, you would pull on the expertise and you get a marketing team come in or whatever it may well be. But the accounting practice industry for so long has just gone, no, we're doing everything.
We're great at everything. We're just great at everything. It's fine. I
can say because I'm not an accountant. So.
The one point where obviously it's all about, yes, you creating the right environment where people feel inspired and like to be. But equally, knowing you guys as long as I have, you're also very clear on the types of individuals and personalities that you want within the business, which I think goes a long way in terms of making sure that you've got that good staff retention. Sorry.
Yeah, I think positivity. We've always been very clear about being a positive person. I think you only need one real negative person to bring the whole mood down of a place. And I think probably that was the thing we learned early on, wasn't it? I think we called it phenomenal positivity. We want, positive failure is the other thing. Is actually saying, well, no, if nobody means to make mistakes. If we thought they did, they wouldn't be employed. So therefore, you've got to give people freedom to have some kind of autonomy and to make a mistake. And if they do, as long as it's not a repeated mistake and that it's a learning experience, then I think we've really promoted that in the company. And it's a difficult thing because I think I was talking about this the other day. I think I could probably walk into a business and I'd know pretty much straight away whether I thought it would be a good fit. It's just from the people that from an initial meeting, you just get that feeling of, and it works both ways. Is it a good fit? And then most things you can work out. Most things you can sort, but you can't sort that chemistry. And it applies to and logically, if you think of it, we don't do all the recruitment anymore. Personally. But of course, the people that are doing the recruitment are the people that we recruited. So it follows through. And, I think that's going back to Nigel's point. I think probably the first thing that he offloaded was the people element, part, where it was,
Yeah, take it
me.
away.
Yeah, basically doesn't like people.
And
There's a whole
technology and
accounting
data,
paper on that one.
Yeah,
but technology and data science, these are all very technical specialist areas. So,
I think, we're talking about the different hats and the different specialisms and people with specialist knowledge and experience that you're bringing in. Obviously, as we all know, the private equity houses, that's one of their main selling points, is saying, we've got this infrastructure, we've got centralized services, we can take all that heavy lifting off of you. You don't have to worry about that, so you can concentrate on your clients. Now, for independents of your size, you essentially have got that infrastructure equally as well. So if there are acquisition opportunities that you're looking at and they're saying, well, I need this off of me, I don't want to do HR anymore, for example, I don't want to do the marketing side, you've actually got that offering to turn around to them and say, well, that's great, we're set up to do that, which again is where you're speaking to the type of market that the private equity aren't necessarily speaking to, but you've still got the same offering in terms of making their life easier and bringing that work-life balance to them, because we all know, compliance, etc., and regulation is increasing, especially on the audit side, and we'll pick up on that in a bit as well. But I think that's one of the main core areas that puts you in a strong position to really attack the market or make the most of the market as it is now.
I think you're right. I think the big thing with acquisitions aren't easy, and I think you need to really, if you're going to get into the market, into the acquisitions market, you need to really have a good reason other than I think I ought to, or I'm worried. You have to have a strategy behind what you're trying to achieve with acquisitions. And I mean, it's interesting. One of the acquisitions we bought a few years ago, actually, we were vying with them for another acquisition, which they chose us over them. And then they came to us and said, actually, would you buy us as well? So, because, and they were only doing it because they felt they ought to. It was a panic reaction. Right. And integration, particularly of small practices, is not easy. So you've got to really understand what you're doing and why and the reason you're doing it. And it's not an ego thing. It's got to add something to what you're already doing. And Nikki mentioned the acquisition we did, the one we did, not the last one, but the one before. That brought a whole new discipline to us. And we had to learn on that. And we used some of their knowledge bank. We used some of our tech knowledge bank. And it took a while to integrate it and to get them away from paper files, but equally their knowledge was second to none. So you sort of work with your team to build it. So I think that is an issue. As I say, there is a lot of, as you're saying, it used to be there was very, very little practices on the market. It was an absolute bun fight over everybody. Now I think that's changing, but you need to be very, very careful. And we do, we don't buy everything that comes through. And even ones that you think would be a good fit, you have to actually sort of really say, right, okay, well, it would be a good fit, but are they, how long is it going to take to integrate the practices, for the cultures to bleed? And that can be, for the bigger practice, that can be a real problem.
Yeah, and sometimes even the partnership model as well. That you've got, say, as a 4-partner firm, you've got 4 different businesses all working underneath the same business.
Absolutely.
So that becomes even more of a headache when it comes to integration, because they'll be doing things completely different to each partner and probably have their own teams as well. And each individual team does a different process for different service lines. So yeah,
all got separate golf clubs. Absolutely, yeah. The whole load of stuff there you need to take into consideration.
Yep. Yeah,
I do think it's we've got an advantage in as much as we've got people sitting here from acquisitions we did 7 years ago, perfectly happy sitting here in an Adval t-shirt. I think going back to your point, I think that you've got to be clear why you're doing it. And I think what we've learned over the years is that actually we say to our team, when we're bringing an acquisition in, we're creating something new. So it's not them and us. We're building something new. And we did 2 in 1 year, which was a lot. Actually, it was quite a lot of integration and transformation. It was quite painful, to be honest, quite challenging, because we've got a lot of things going on, a lot of moving parts. But what the big thing that came through it really was being very clear. We have a bit of a buddy system so that people can talk to someone else who's already been through that process themselves. So, because change is very challenging generally. And I think that I think we've got a method of doing it now. So I think the more you do these
I think
things,
that's always a powerful tool. Whenever I am speaking to potential sellers, recommend or introduce them to an acquirer. If there's people they can speak to that have gone through the process and quite happy to have a warts and all discussion to show what the process was like on the run up to it, but actually what life was post acquisition. That's such a powerful tool because you're really just speaking to the human being then and understanding everything that went on during that. And that for me, if you've got those examples of happy endings, that's perfect.
Yeah,
I think it's an interesting thing. I mean, going back to being independent. I think that independent, if it gives you the ability to innovate, not just with technology, but to innovate, whether that is from a staff perspective, from a marketing perspective, I think there's a much more open approach to innovation. I think the issue that you do get with private equity is I think private equity will sweat existing assets, but have they really got an ambition to innovate? Probably not, because of the cost. And obviously, if you're looking at a 3 to 5 year EBITDA spin, even with add backs, that's going to be something that is probably a bit off the radar for many private equity companies. So they will give you a comfortable home. They will give you, an HR department. They will give you some marketing backup, but they're not really going to innovate. And as an independent, I love the innovation side. I think it's a market that lends itself to innovation. So, that's probably an appeal with coming into someone like us, to one of the smaller independents, is you're actually going into something that's potentially a little bit more individual, if you like. Yeah. And we are seeing as well, I don't know if you're seeing this, James, but we are seeing that there's people that are actually coming out of private equity because it's too formulaic into practices which are a little bit more organic, like ourselves.
Absolutely. I think we're starting to see that cycle now where people they've almost not been railroaded. That's a strong word to use, but they're not happy in their new environment. And it might have not been their decision. It probably was the equity guy's decision, but that next gen of like, well, my equity's gone really. I'm going to be part of a really small pool if there is some growth shares in there or there's some equity in the private equity model for me. But 9 times out of 10, really, you're just going to be a salaried partner. There's kind of the expectations you get to with bonuses based on performance. So there are many now that are just spitting out and going, well, I'm going to set up on my own and give it a go.
And again, from an innovation perspective, it's really interesting because a lot of the people we're talking to, particularly the older sole 2-partner practices, sort of in my age group, they're worried about technology, and they're saying we know we've got to invest, but we can't do that. You've got other people, perhaps some of the newer practices, doing stuff like we did. We would try and do stuff ourselves, which becomes incredibly cost inefficient. And I think, but I think it is being used a little bit as a tool to scare people at the moment, like Cloud was, like KPMG were. It's been thrown in there to say, right, you've got to do this because if you don't, then you're going to get swallowed up. And I don't think that's not the case. I think for me, true innovation will actually come from the app partners because they can spread their cost over 2,000 clients. So for me, I think that to move to private equity, I don't, as I say, my gut feel, I've not seen a private equity company that's truly innovative. And I think that innovation comes from the sector. If you go to Accountex, that half of those vendors that were there last year probably won't be there this year because they'll either run out of cash or the project doesn't work or, there's just not the adoption. They haven't put the money into marketing. So, I mean, for me, one of the skills is always looking at those innovators, those businesses that have already got a good foothold in the market and are doing exciting stuff. And I'll just let them do the spend and we'll take the benefit. So I don't think that, the technology, the fear of technology is quite as bad as, to say, we don't know what we're going to do. I think that is a natural reaction. But I think
it's
for
more
us,
lack of staff, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, for us, the first thing we did was look at our young guys and say, you guys were brought up with technology. The stuff you do without thinking that takes me a month to understand. So I want you to do that. I don't need to understand it. I want you to do that. I'll obviously look at the outputs and look at the wider implications of it. So you're not just going tonto into it, but But, again, it comes back to what we're saying. If you're comfortable with technology, which a lot of the younger guys are really comfortable with technology, allow them to grow and build it and actually learn from them. And I think that's quite a difficult thing sometimes to do.
It's a really, really interesting point you make there. And, one of the topics I wanted to cover with you was indeed that, innovation, where the private equity houses are saying, look, as part of our portfolio, we've invested loads of technology companies. We've got an abundance of cash behind us. We will invest in AI. We will invest in technology. And that's one of the things that's been sold to a lot of the firms. But even I've seen it, there's a certain amount of FOMO or fear of missing out from some of the larger independents now that have gone, wow, we're going to get left behind here if we don't join up with one of these large platforms. Purely down on the tech side, they're like, we're quite happy with the way the business is running. We're good at keeping our staff. We're good at keeping our clients, but we're really, really frightened that we're going to get left behind on this tech journey. So it's interesting that you're making the point of actually being small and nimble, having a young team around us. We've actually got all the ability in the world to be able to innovate far quickly and in a lot more agile way than maybe some of the private equity firms would.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, to be honest with you, James, and perhaps, as I'm being a bit controversial, I don't think it's in private equity's interest to innovate. I think at the end of the day, they will sweat their existing assets, but they won't innovate because they're looking, it's all about bottom line. They might have other companies in their portfolios to do it, but that's just a high level sales tactic. And I think that is a word of warning with private equity. These guys, a lot of the guys that are talking to you are sales guys. They're not the guys that are going to be working day to day. Some of them are not, but you have to be very, very mindful when you're talking to private equity. They will tell you great things. For me, true innovation comes from the app partners, and true innovation comes, for me, I tend to look at people like KPMG and what they're doing because they are investing in innovation. They are investing in AI. It's really interesting to see some of the areas that they're developing. But private equity, I've not really seen one that I would say is a true innovator.
It seems to me when I'm speaking to them, they're on a journey at the moment. So they've got like the baseline.
Everybody's on a journey, James.
I appreciate that, but I think that's what that's kind of what they're selling at the moment is, look, we've got the money behind us. We think we've got the expertise through maybe other businesses or people that we've brought in, and it's a development type. So there's not a golden bullet there or something you can hang your hat on and say, absolutely, that's going to be the answer to what I'm looking for, which is what is being sold in some circumstances, I think.
I think, I mean, I'm being perhaps a bit pedantic on that and perhaps a bit controversial, but if I'm looking at private equity with a finance director's hat on, I'm looking at EBITDA, I'm looking at process, I'm looking at system, I'm looking at sweating what we're doing, and I really don't want people going off doing things that they're not, that we've got no definitive outcome from. And they might have other companies offering stuff. But again, that platform will be on a different trajectory to an accountancy practice. They might be saying, well, we'll look to spin that in, it depends where they are in the investment process.
It'll be a separate intellectual property, right? That they could sell on at some point to something else rather than it being aligned truly with that particular accountancy practice.
I am a fan of private equity getting involved. I know it might sound like I'm not, but I am a fan of private equity getting involved. But I think you need to know what you're getting in bed with, and you need to understand what the bigger game is. And that's absolutely fine. Some practices are absolutely fine.
Can I just say as well, I think the other thing is that I think what really has changed is I think firms collaborating together. So I think the independent firms have an opportunity to collaborate more together. If that's not the route they want to go down, then I think that, certainly we've done it with smaller firms where we're able to provide some of those things for them. And maybe that there'll be more of that in the future because I do think autonomy, I think some partners really value that above all else. So if you're going into a private equity model, you are not going to have that autonomy. You just won't. So, I think for those that want to stay partnership or want to stay independent, I think that is going to be, for me, I see that as a big opportunity is actually more strategic partnerships. Certainly how we've always been able to punch above our weight in that respect, haven't we?
And it's, absolutely. And it's not black and white. I mean, there are some really interesting models out there where companies will take a share in the business, a share in your business. So, for instance, the challenge that we've always had is, is not actually necessarily finding practices to buy, but it's finding the cash to buy them, particularly without, a significant backer. And I think there are some really exciting innovations in terms of, it doesn't have to be sell or don't sell. And I was talking to somebody quite a senior private equity house the other day who have been bought by private equity, saying you either sell or you don't sell. And I don't think that's the case anymore. I think that there are some really interesting opportunities where you've got people that will allow you to be yourself, and rely on you to keep doing what you're doing, but will actually back you to do it. And I think that giving some equity is a natural way of doing that if you're looking to grow and acquire. And I don't think you should be, again, that's just a business model. But you have to do your due diligence on those sorts of models.
And I think that's the great thing about the market right now, especially for independent and smaller independents, where either they're looking to sell or whatever the next chapter looks like. There is more models and options out there than ever before. And I disagree with the individual that you spoke to, Nigel, where it's like sold or be sold. I don't think so. I don't think that is the option out there, because even if you are selling, there's still a tailor-made arrangement that can be made post completion where you're still playing a real pivotal or important part, or having a say in that next chapter in whatever entity that is, whether it's joining teams with another independent firm of some kind, which is same thought process, etc. So yeah, there's different models out there. People are a lot more open to tailor making arrangements now than what they've ever been before. And I think it's really down to how much disruption we're seeing in the market right now. You have to, because there's so many people with different areas of their career, so many people with different areas of expertise, so many people with different areas of development in terms of their own career and client bases, client relationships, the type of services they're offering, that you have to be a little bit more nimble. You have to be more agile, more flexible, which I guess is a nice way of kind of wrapping up where we see right now, where we've got the private equity platforms that will speak to a part in the market, and they've certainly played their part. I don't think we can deny that.
No,
in
absolutely.
the conversations around tech, software, and really highlighting the pain points in the industry right now, which is helping other independents, people like yourselves, pinpoint those, improve those areas, and have a really good offering for not only their staff now, but potential acquisition opportunities that they're speaking to as well at the moment to make their life better when they do join you, which, ultimately when you're going on the journey, all you want to do is have that best in class as you go through it. So if you acquire someone and you realize they've got a particular employee benefit that's better than what you're offering right now, you're probably going to include that, right? Going
Absolutely
forward.
Right.
And same on the technology side.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, as I say, it sounds like I've had a little bit of dig at private equity. That's certainly not the case. And it's like all things, same as independence, you do your due diligence on the people you're talking to. There's a very definite place, and I think it's been a very positive impact. And there are some extremely good private equity propositions in this space. Yeah. I think, you have to look at all areas, and I think you have to, I think the key thing is you have to, if you're going to exit, you have to have and things change. I mean, I'll be honest, from our perspective, things have changed. We would look at one thing and then something else would pop on the table, and you think, oh, actually, that probably ticks more of our boxes, on both sides, from an acquirer and maybe from, as obviously you always look at what's in the space, and it's interesting. So yeah, I think, but it is a question of being prepared to have, understand where you want to take it. If you've got no succession, an outright sale is probably something you want to do. And it's tough running a business. I mean, in all my years, I think the last 12 months, 2 years have been probably the toughest, in the 25 years I've been running Adval. I mean, it's a really tough market, and, with obviously all the stuff going on.
That's been interesting for me to see, is where it really was succession or talent issues were the two main drivers. Yeah. That's completely flipped now. The last 6 months, it's literally practitioners or owners of accountancy practices just saying it's too much. Yeah. I'm getting hit from all sides. It's too much. It's really I don't want to do it anymore.
It's really tough. I mean, it's the things we have to, look at now from a regulatory perspective, even down to, sort of AML monitoring and that type of thing. And you do get the golden, the age-old issue, which seems to be starting to be addressed, is when you've got unregulated accountants in the market disrupting the lower end. as well. And I think there are seems to be moves in that space. But yeah, I mean, there's a whole raft of, employment law. There's a whole raft of, fortunately, I don't have to get involved in any of that. We've got somebody much cleverer than me and much nicer than me doing that. But employment law, there's, regulatory changes, money laundering changes, which, which actually sound pretty innocuous. They are pretty robust, I can tell you.
Yeah.
And then you've got obviously a changing commercial landscape as well, and technology. It's tough, and if you're on your own, it's a lonely place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess just zooming away from acquisitions as well, just generally, you're talking about the commercial landscape. You've got the larger firms as they're getting acquired and consolidating that are purging their client base, which is then passing down to, independents like yourselves. So you're probably getting higher value clients than what you've ever seen. But likewise, underneath you in the food chain, if you like, you've got those that, because of the regulatory landscape change, they're giving up audit, they're giving up other clients because they can't simply keep up. So you're kind of sitting quite nicely as an independent at the moment, where there's probably workflows coming from both sides.
It's great. And as I said earlier, I think one of the things private equity, but the bigger firms as well with purging, is that overall you're seeing fees increase, and which is great because suddenly, we're competing with perhaps clients that are audits where, were GT or KPMG or wherever they sit, much higher fees, much more of a bullish approach. So you can go in and compete in that space. And suddenly, I mean, I never ever thought in my career I would say this, but suddenly for us, audit is a really important part of our business. And we've got a dedicated team that do it. And I guess that's the important thing, as you know, as well. We do a lot in the R&D space, which has been a bit challenging over the last year or two, it's got to be said. But again, I think there's certain spaces, whether you either do it or you don't do it, I think the danger you get, again, this is for a practitioner mindset, the danger is if you try to be all things to all men, you're going to come unstuck, particularly now. So, I was sort of saying with R&D, you either do it or you don't do it. There's no middle ground anymore. With audit, you either do it or you don't do it. You can't do two or three. And we're seeing, as you say, we're seeing audits coming up to us from smaller practices who just don't want the aggravation or want to offer all the other services. And we're also seeing some really top end clients for us coming down the chain as well. And that's great for staff. You want to be giving people that ability to actually be able to develop and grow. And you get that with different sorts of clients as well. So, it's a good market. It's a really interesting space.
It's amazing, isn't it? All the different topics that we've covered today. The general theme is know your pathway, know your journey where you're going, and stay in your lane and do it well.
Yeah.
No matter what that is, whether it's the business as a whole, whether it's the service lines you're doing, the technology pathway, the type of individuals that you want within your team, and what you're offering your team. You just need to be very clear on what it is you're looking to achieve and in what direction you're heading on that. And hopefully it should all pull together from there. So,
very much so.
So yeah, no, look, thank you very much for your time. I'm super excited to see where the Valorem journey goes over the next few years and beyond.
Infinity and beyond.
Thank you for talking to me and spending an hour or so.
Great stuff. Thanks so much, James.
Bye.
Cheers.
Take care.
Take care.
Catch up soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.